Hello, this morning today's objective is 3.9 DIII. We will analyze a biography by recognizing organizational patterns of cause and effect. We'll review that the cause is the reason for something happening, the effect is what happened. They're going to call this story a narrative nonfiction, but it's also a biography, which is a type of narrative nonfiction. It is the story of a real person's life that is written by another person. And again, most biographies have a text structure that follows chronological or time order. Again, a narrative nonfiction is about past events. This one happens to be a biography about someone's life. So here it says, what is the author's purpose for writing a narrative nonfiction? This is real pictures of Jane, the main character in the house that Jane built. It says in 1889, a wealthy young woman named Jane Addams moved into a lovely, elegant house in Chicago, Illinois. But instead of moving into a lovely, elegant neighborhood, she picked a house that was smack in the middle of one of the filthiest, poorest parts of town. Why would a wealthy young woman do this when she could have lived anywhere? So here it says, describe the setting of the story as it's presented there in paragraph 1. Jane was just 6 years old when she went on a trip with her father and noticed that not everyone lived like her family did. She vowed that one day she would live right in the midst of horrid little houses and find a way to fix the world. Jane was a strong soul from the start, and she was brave. When she and her stepfather George were young, they would sneak away at night to explore in nearby caves. Once Jane lowered George over a cliff on a rope to spy on an owl in its nest. What words does the author use to describe Jane? Jane was smart. She read and read from her father's book collection, which doubled as the town library. Most girls did not go to college then, but Jane's father believed women should be educated. She went to Rockford Female Seminary and graduated at the top of her class. But when school was over, she wasn't sure what to do with her life. That same summer, her father died. Jane was lost. It says use context clues in order to determine the meaning of the word collection as it is used in paragraph 5. About 2 years later, she and her friends traveled to Europe. They went to the theater, the opera, and many beautiful places. But then Jane saw something in London that she couldn't forget. People in ragged clothes with outstretched hands begging a cart vendor to buy his leftover rotten fruits and vegetables that hadn't sold at market. The spoiled food was all they could afford. Excuse me. What could she do to help? Long after her trip was over, the question stuck in her mind. She remembered how she felt when she was 6. What did Jane see in London that stuck in her mind forever? Jane traveled back to London to learn about a place she had heard was helping the poor in a brand new way. At Toynbee Hall, the idea was to have rich and poor people live together in the same community and learn from each other. Instead of simply serving soup, for example, people could take cooking classes. Other skills were taught as well. Toynbee Hall was the first settlement house. It was called a settlement house because the well-off people who worked there during the day didn't go back to their own homes at night. Instead, they settled in and lived at Toynbee Hall, right in the same neighborhood as the needy. Jane now knew what to do. Use details from the text in order to explain why Toynbee Hall was called a settlement house. She told her friend Ellen Gates Starr about her plan to build a settlement house in Chicago. It was as if a racehorse had burst out of the gate, free at last to pour every ounce of energy into running. There was a glittery side to Chicago with its mansions, fancy shops, and sparkling lakefront, but there was a gritty side too. 1 million people lived in Chicago in 1889. Most were immigrants, people who came from other countries. They came for a better life, but they didn't speak English. That made it hard to find good jobs. Many needed help. Use details from the text in order to explain what the word immigrants means. Why was it hard for immigrants to find jobs? Jane found the perfect house. It had big rooms with high ceilings and marble fireplaces, and it was one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. Garbage lay rotting in the streets, piled high. Large families were crammed into tiny ramshackle houses with no running water. The outhouse smell from backlot outhouses hung in the air. Rough boys ran the streets, stirring up trouble because they had nothing to do. That's it today. Your last question, you'll fill in the empty box here to state the cause of why the rough boys ran the streets, stirring up trouble. Thank you for listening to the video. I'll see you in class. Goodbye.